she was a black woman standing at a gate she had walked through dozens of times before. Red blazer, yellow handbag, heels on stone. Calm as a woman who has nothing to prove, because she already proved it years ago. And then his hand closed around her wrist. He was enormous. 2 meters of muscle, tattoos climbing his neck, mirrored sunglasses reflecting back the woman he had already decided he knew everything about. New to the post, certain of his authority, certain of what she was, and what she wasn't. He never asked her name. He never asked her purpose. He looked at her, and he knew. Or at least, he thought he did. What Marcus Webb did not know, could not have imagined in that moment of absolute misplaced certainty, was that somewhere inside that mansion, behind walls that held secrets no newspaper would ever print, a man was watching. A man with a dragon tattooed on his neck. A man the streets called Hook Ryung. The Korean mafia boss himself, Kwon Jae-hyun. And he was watching every single second on a live feed from that camera in the upper left corner of his own gate. Watching a guard grab the wrist of the woman who had carried his most confidential documents for 4 years without ever once failing him. She could have said one word, one name, and it would have ended immediately. She chose not to. What she did instead, and what happened to the man who grabbed her arm, will change the way you think about power, dignity, and the dangerous cost of assumption forever. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. There are moments in life that announce themselves. You feel them arriving. The air shifts, the light changes. Something in your chest tightens before your mind can explain why. And then there are the moments that do not announce themselves at all. The ones that arrive dressed in the ordinary. In a Thursday afternoon, in a yellow handbag, in the sound of heels on stone. Those are the dangerous ones. Latasha Monroe had learned, early and permanently, that the world would always try to tell her what she was before she had the chance to show it. She had learned it as a child in Atlanta, watching her mother straighten her collar before school with the quiet intensity of a woman who understood that appearance was armor. She had learned it at 22, sitting in a glass office in New York, while a man in an expensive tie looked at her resume, and then at her face, and then back at her resume, as if trying to reconcile the two. She had learned it so many times, in so many rooms, with so many different faces performing the same tired calculation. And every single time, she had given them the same response. Silence. Composure. And then, eventually, proof. By 32, she had stopped being angry about it. Not because it stopped happening, but because she had understood something that most people in her position never quite managed to reach. The assumption was never about her. It was about the person making it. Their fear, their limitation, their ceiling mistaken for the sky. She stepped out of the car with the envelope tucked securely in her mustard yellow handbag, the gold chain strap resting against the red of her blazer. The fabric was structured, precise, the kind of red that does not apologize for itself. Her black trousers fell in a clean line to her ankle. Her heels met the stone of the driveway with a sound that was unhurried and deliberate. She had dressed this morning the way she always dressed. Not to impress, but to be present. Fully, unapologetically present. The Kwon estate rose behind its gate like something that had always existed and always would. Stone walls draped in afternoon shadow, iron that had not rusted because it had not been given the chance. Inside those walls, meetings happened that newspapers would never report. Decisions were made that moved money the way rivers move. Not loudly, not visibly, but inevitably, and in only one direction. Latasha had walked through those gates more times than she could count. She knew the sounds the gravel made under her shoes. She knew which camera tracked left and which one held still. She knew that the light in the third window of the east wing meant the chefe was in his office and not yet finished with whoever sat across from him. She knew this house the way you only know a place you have committed yourself to. Not with affection necessarily, with precision. What she did not know was the face waiting at the gate. He was enormous in the way that certain men are enormous, not just in height or mass, but in the deliberate occupation of space. 2 meters of muscle packed into a black security uniform, shoulders squared like a man who had been told his whole life that size was authority. His head was shaved clean, the dome of his skull catching the afternoon light with a dull gleam. Tattoos climbed his neck and his forearms, dark ink patterns that spoke of a particular kind of history, the kind written on skin rather than paper. He wore mirrored sunglasses that reflected back whoever stood before him, and in Latasha's case, what they reflected was a woman in red, standing still, assessed and already categorized before she had opened her mouth. She noticed all of this in the first 2 seconds. She filed it. She walked forward. "Can I help you?" he said. The phrasing was technically a question. The tone was not. Latasha offered him the kind of smile that costs nothing and means everything. Warm on the surface, calibrated underneath. "Latasha Monroe, personal secretary to Mr. Kwan. I have a scheduled delivery." He did not move. His jaw shifted slightly, the way a man's jaw shifts when he is deciding between 2 options and has already chosen the one that will cause the most friction. "There's nothing in the system for today." "The system was updated yesterday evening," she said. "If you contact Mr. Kwan's internal assistant, he'll confirm I know how to do my job, ma'am." There it was. The word wrapped around something that was not respect, delivered with the precision of a man who wanted to remind her of a distance he had decided existed between them. Latasha had heard that word used this way more times than she cared to count. It was never about formality. It was always about a door being held just barely open, just enough to suggest she could enter, if she behaved correctly, if she waited long enough, if she made herself small enough to pass through without disturbing the frame. She reached for her phone. She would call Kim Do-yeon directly. She would resolve this the way she always resolved these things. Quietly, efficiently, without a scene. That was what she did. That was what she had always done. Not because she was afraid, but because she was the kind of person who understood that a scene serves the other person. It gives them what they want. Evidence of disorder. Evidence of emotion. Evidence that they were right to be suspicious. She would give him none of that. But before her fingers could finish unlocking the screen, his hand closed around her wrist. Not a brush. Not a warning. A grip. The envelope fell from her other hand and struck the stone below. A flat and final sound. The world did not stop exactly, but it slowed. The way it slows in the moment before a glass hits the floor. That suspended instant where every outcome is still theoretically possible, but only one is actually coming. Latasha looked down at his hand. She looked up at his face. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. "You're not going anywhere until I verify who you are." His voice was low and certain, the voice of a man who had never been wrong about a situation like this, because he had never allowed himself to be in a position where wrong was possible. He was the guard. She was the arrival. The structure was simple in his mind, and structures that simple rarely allow for revision. What he did not know, could not have known because no one had told him, and no one had thought to tell him, was that the camera mounted in the upper left corner of the gate was not a recording camera. It was a live feed, and it transmitted directly to a monitor in the office of Kwon Jae-hyun, where at that exact moment, a man with a dragon climbing the left side of his neck looked up from a document and saw with complete clarity everything that was happening at the front gate of his home. Little did Marcus Webb know that the very second his hand closed around Latasha Monroe's wrist, his future in that post, and every post like it, had already ended. Not with a confrontation, not with a raised voice. It had ended the way most things end in environments like that estate, in rooms like that office. In silence. In a decision already made. In consequences that had not yet arrived, but were already in motion, moving through the building with the quiet certainty of weather. Inside the office, Kwon set down his pen. He did not speak immediately. The two men standing near the wall watched him the way people watch a still surface that they know from experience is not as calm as it appears. He reached for the intercom. Outside, at the gate, Latasha Monroe stood with her wrist held by a man who believed, with complete conviction, that he was in control of the situation. She was not afraid. She was not shaking. She was waiting. Because she had lived long enough and worked in close enough proximity to real power to understand something that Marcus Webb, with all his physical authority and all his new employee certainty, had not yet grasped. The ones who carry the most weight never announce it at the door. They don't have to. She looked at him, calm as a court of law, and said only this. Before you decide what to do next, I would think very carefully. He did not think carefully, and that was the last uncomplicated moment of his professional life. The afternoon light had shifted by the time the gate opened from the inside. Not dramatically, not with the kind of cinematic slowness that announces significance. It simply opened, the way gates open when someone with the authority to open them decides that the moment has arrived. And in that small mechanical motion, iron moving on hinges, stone framing the space beyond, something in the atmosphere at the front of the Kwon estate changed in a way that Marcus Webb felt before he understood it. He felt it in the quality of the silence. There are silences that mean nothing, the pause between sentences, the quiet of an empty room. And then there are silences that carry weight, the kind that accumulates, that presses against the skin, that makes a person aware, on some level below conscious thought, that the situation they believed they were managing has already moved past their management entirely. Marcus had not released Latasha's wrist. He would think about that later. He would think about the exact moment he should have let go, 2 seconds after the grip began, when her expression did not change. When most people, held by someone his size, would have shown fear or aggression, or the particular kind of desperate negotiation that told a man like him that he was correct, that his authority was real, that the situation was unfolding the way it was supposed to unfold. Latasha Monroe had shown him none of those things. She had looked at him the way a person looks at a slow-moving problem they have already solved in their head. The kind of look that belongs to someone who is not experiencing the situation, but observing it. He should have understood then. He did not. Instead, he heard footsteps. They came from inside the compound, unhurried, measured. The sound of expensive leather soles on stone that had been laid by craftsmen who understood that a floor should be felt, not just walked upon. The footsteps did not quicken. They did not slow. They arrived at exactly the pace they had begun. And when Kwon Jae-hyun stepped through the gate, two figures trailing behind him in the particular silence of men who know their role is to witness rather than participate. Marcus Webb experienced something he was not accustomed to experiencing. Doubt. Kwon was not physically imposing in the way that Marcus was physically imposing. He was lean, contained, the kind of man whose presence occupies space not through mass, but through an absolute absence of uncertainty. His charcoal suit was impeccable. Not new, not performative, simply correct. The way things around Kwon Jae-hyun tended to be correct because he did not permit them to be otherwise. His black hair was swept back from a face that gave nothing away. And climbing the left side of his neck, disappearing behind his ear, the ink of a dragon rendered in black and shadow. Not decorative, not fashionable, but earned. The way markings are earned by men who have passed through fires that other men cannot name. He said nothing at first. He looked at Latasha, a single sweep of attention that covered everything. The envelope on the ground, the wrist, the posture, the expression. Then he looked at the wrist again. Then he looked at Marcus. And Marcus, for the first time in a very long time, felt the specific discomfort of being looked at by someone who was not seeing what he wanted them to see, but exactly what was there. You touched her. 3 words. No inflection, no volume. The kind of sentence that doesn't need decoration because the content is sufficient. Marcus released Latasha's wrist. The release came a full 3 seconds after it should have. Still too late. Already recorded, already irreversible. But the body's instinct toward self-correction kicking in with the helpless timing of a mistake realizing itself. Sir, I was following protocol. She didn't have clearance in the system and I was— You touched her. Kwon said it again. Identical delivery. Not louder, not softer. Simply repeated with the patience of a man who does not need to raise his voice because he has never in his adult life needed to raise his voice to make a point land. Marcus stopped talking. Kwon walked past him, bent in a single fluid motion, and retrieved the envelope from the stone. He straightened, turned, and held it out to Latasha with both hands. A gesture so deliberate, so publicly considered, that it functioned less like a handoff and more like a statement. In environments like this one, gesture was language. And what Kwon had just said, without a word, to every person present, to the camera still recording in the upper left corner of the gate, was something that could not be unsaid. La. His voice changed almost imperceptibly when he addressed her. Not warmer, exactly. Warmth was not the primary currency of Kwon Jae-hyun. But different. The difference between the way a man speaks to the world and the way he speaks to someone who belongs to his inner circle. Are you all right? Latasha accepted the envelope. She looked at her wrist briefly, then back at him. I'm fine, Mr. Kwon. He held her gaze for 1 additional second. Then he turned back to Marcus, and the temperature of his attention was something different entirely. Come with me. Not a request. Marcus knew the distinction. Every person present knew the distinction. He followed. What passed between them in the corridor, Latasha did not hear. She stood at the gate as one of the other security staff, a man who had been at the estate for 3 years and who looked at the ground when he walked past her as if ashamed by proximity to what had just occurred, gestured for her to follow him inside. She was guided to the East Wing sitting room, offered tea she did not drink, and left alone with the documents and the kind of quiet that exists in well-built rooms. She sat with perfect posture. She thought. Not about the wrist, not about the moment at the gate. She thought about the choice she had made in that moment when the grip first closed, the choice not to invoke the name, the choice to stand in her own authority rather than borrow someone else's. She turned it over in her mind, examined it, found no fault in it. A borrowed name protects you once. Your own dignity, if you maintain it, that protects you always. The lesson of the moment was not that she had powerful friends. The lesson was that she had stood correctly in a storm and not bent. She was still thinking about this when the door opened and Kwon entered alone. He sat across from her, accepted the documents, and reviewed them with the focused efficiency of a man for whom time was the only resource that could not be restructured or recovered. He signed where required, initialed where noted, passed each page back to her across the low table. "The Choi situation," he said without looking up. "Is the secondary filing confirmed?" "Confirmed this morning, 9:15. Kim Do-yeon has the receipt." "And the meeting Thursday?" "Moved to 11 at your request. The other party confirmed." "Good." The exchange was seamless, professional, the practiced rhythm of two people who had worked together long enough to communicate in shorthand. And yet underneath it, Latasha was aware of something that had not been spoken, something Kwon was deciding whether to address or leave in the room's atmosphere, like a weight that could either be acknowledged or simply carried. He set the last document down. "He was new," Kwon said. Not as an excuse. As a fact, offered flatly. "I know. New does not excuse it." "I know that too." He looked at her with the directness that had always been, in her experience, the most unsettling and most honest thing about him. Kwon Jae-hyun did not look at people to read them. He already knew what he would find. He looked at people to let them know he knew. "You could have stopped it immediately. You knew it." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She had already answered this question in her own mind, in the sitting room, while the tea cooled untouched beside her. But hearing it spoken aloud by him, by a man who understood power in its most absolute and undecorated form, made the answer feel heavier, more necessary. Because the lesson mattered more than the shortcut. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. In a room with Kwon Jae-hyun, 3 seconds of silence was not empty. It was full. Full of processing, of assessment, of something that might, in another man, have been called respect. "He's gone," Kwon said simply. "I assumed. The company will be notified." "That seems right." Another silence. Shorter this time. "You've been here 4 years," he said. "Yes." "You've never once used my name at a door." It was not a question. It was an observation delivered with the precision of a man cataloging a pattern he had noticed, but never before elected to name out loud. Latasha met his eyes. "I have never needed to," she said. And the truth of it settled between them like something solid. Not comfortable, not warm, but real. The way only true things are real. The way only earned things hold. Outside, somewhere in the compound, a door closed. And with it, Marcus Webb's time inside those walls ended without ceremony, without appeal, without the dramatic confrontation he might have imagined if he had imagined this scenario at all. He hadn't imagined it. That was the entire problem. Marcus Webb drove home in silence. Not the comfortable silence of a man at peace with his day, but the particular silence of a man replaying a sequence of events with the desperate hope that somewhere inside the replay, there is a version where the outcome is different. He drove the same streets he had driven that morning when everything was still ordinary, when the job was a job and the gate was just a gate, and the woman in the red blazer was, in his mind, simply a problem to be managed. He had been so certain. That was the part that gnawed at him as the city moved past his windows in streaks of light and ordinary life. Not the outcome. Outcomes could be rationalized, reframed, assigned to bad luck or bad timing, or the particular cruelty of situations that spiral beyond a person's control. It was the certainty that disturbed him. The absolute, unexamined, load-bearing certainty with which he had looked at Latasha Monroe and decided, in the space of a breath, what she was and what she was not, and what she was therefore entitled to. He had been so sure. And the most uncomfortable truth of the drive home, the one he circled and approached and retreated from with the instinct of a man not yet ready to look directly at something, was that his certainty had not come from anything she had done. She had not been loud. She had not been aggressive. She had not given him a single concrete reason to treat her as a threat. His certainty had come from somewhere else entirely. From something assembled long before that afternoon. From sources he had never examined because they had always simply felt like common sense, like instinct, like the natural and obvious reading of a situation. He had looked at a woman in a red blazer with a yellow handbag, and he had known. Known in that easy and automatic way what category she belonged to, what level of patience he owed her, what degree of skepticism was appropriate. He had been wrong. Not just factually wrong. She had clearance. She had authorization. She was exactly who she said she was. He had been wrong at a level beneath the facts. He had been wrong in the equipment he used to read the situation. And that kind of wrong is harder to fix than a mistake. A mistake can be corrected. A flawed instrument keeps producing flawed results until the instrument itself is examined. He parked outside his apartment building and sat in the car for a long time. Inside the Kwan estate, the evening moved in its own register. The documents Latasha had delivered were processed, cross-referenced, and filed within the hour. 2 calls were made from the East Wing office, one to a legal firm in Singapore, one to a number that existed in no directory. By the time the sun completed its descent behind the western edge of the city, the business of the afternoon had been absorbed into the larger machinery of Kwon Jae-hyun's operations, which did not pause for disruption, did not reorganize around inconvenience, and did not leave space for the personal to bleed into the professional. This was by design. And Latasha, who had helped build that design over 4 years of meticulous, invisible work, understood it better than almost anyone. She was preparing to leave when Kim Do-yeon appeared in the doorway of the sitting room. Young, efficient, with the particular energy of a man who had learned very quickly that in this environment, anticipating the need was more valuable than responding to it. "The car is ready, Ms. Monroe." "Thank you, Do-yeon." He hesitated in the doorway. It was a small hesitation, barely visible, the kind that most people would miss. Latasha did not miss it. "What is it?" He looked briefly toward the corridor, then back at her. "I should have briefed him more thoroughly. The new guard. I handled the onboarding and I didn't..." He stopped, started again. "I should have made sure he had a complete list of authorized visitors. With descriptions, with context." He said it cleanly, without excessive self-flagellation, simply stating a failure with the directness of someone who understood that accountability was not punishment, but information. "It won't happen again." Latasha studied him for a moment. "No," she said. "It won't." And then, because she understood the difference between closing a wound and leaving it open to teach a lesson. "You're good at what you do, Do-yeon. Today was a gap. Fill it. Move forward." He nodded once. Relieved, but not fully. The kind of relief that comes with the understanding that the relief itself is a responsibility. He stepped aside, and she walked through the doorway, down the corridor, past the rooms she had walked past dozens of times before. The estate was quieter now. The light had changed from the sharp gold of late afternoon to the softer amber of early evening, and it moved through the tall windows at angles that made the stone walls look almost warm, almost human. She had never been sentimental about this place. Sentiment was a luxury that her position did not accommodate. But she was honest about it, in the way she was honest about most things. It was a place that had asked a great deal of her, and had, in its own cold and structured way, given a great deal in return. Not warmth, not ease, but something more durable than either. Proof. Every day she walked through those gates and did her work, and carried the weight of the access and the knowledge and the trust that Kwon Jae-hyun had extended to her. Not easily, not quickly, but eventually and completely, was another day that quietly dismantled the argument that people like Marcus Webb made without speaking, simply by existing with the certainty they carried. She passed the main gate. The space where it had happened was just stone now. Ordinary stone. The camera in the upper left corner was still, watching nothing in particular. The evening air was cool and carried the faint sound of the city beyond the walls. Traffic, voices, the persistent hum of a place that did not stop to register individual moments. She got into the car. 3 days passed. In those 3 days, Marcus Webb sent 2 emails to the security company that had placed him at the estate. The first was a request for information about the termination, professional, measured, asking whether there was a formal review process, whether the circumstances had been documented, whether there was an avenue for response. The second email was sent 48 hours after the first, when no response had come, and it was shorter and considerably less measured. It asked, in language that fell just below the threshold of accusation, whether the decision had been made by the estate or by the company, and whether it had been made on the basis of what had actually occurred or on the basis of who was involved. He did not receive a response to the second email either. Not because the company was indifferent, not because the situation had been ignored, but because, in environments that operate at the level of the Kwon estate, the response to questions like the ones Marcus was asking is almost never delivered through official channels. It is delivered through the simple, implacable fact of the outcome itself. The decision had been made. The decision was the response. Everything else was noise. He called a former colleague who had connections in the private security sector in the city, a man named Reeves, who knew people, who had placed him in 3 previous positions, who owed him a favor from a situation 2 years prior that neither of them discussed directly, but both understood perfectly. Reeves listened. Then Reeves was quiet for a moment that went on slightly longer than comfortable. "Which estate?" Reeves asked. Marcus told him. Another silence, different in quality from the first. "Marcus?" Reeves's voice had shifted, not unkind, but careful in the specific way of a man choosing his words because he understands the weight of what he is about to say. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as someone who is trying to help you. Not as a warning, as information. Go ahead." "The woman you stopped at the gate. You understand who she works for." "I know who she works for now. I didn't know then. That's the whole—" "Marcus." Reeves said his name again, quietly. "That's not the issue. You understand that's not the issue." The line was quiet. Marcus sat very still. "What do you mean?" he said, though somewhere below the question the answer was already arriving. Slowly, in the way of things that have been true for a while before they are acknowledged. "The issue," Reeves said carefully, "is not that you didn't recognize her authorization. The issue is why you didn't believe her when she told you. A pause. You're going to need to sit with that one. I can't fix that part for you. The call ended shortly after. Marcus set his phone down on the kitchen table. Outside his window, the city continued in its total indifference to his particular crisis. Lights coming on in buildings across the street, the sound of someone's television through a shared wall, the smell of rain beginning somewhere above the roofline. He sat with it. And for the first time since Thursday afternoon, he was not trying to find the version of the replay where the outcome was different. He was trying, instead, to find the moment, the real moment, the one that predated the gate and the grip and the falling envelope, where the problem had actually begun. It was further back than he wanted it to be. Much further back. The rain came properly that night. Not the suggestion of rain that had been building since evening. The smell of it, the pressure drop, the particular quality of air that knows what is coming before it arrives. The actual rain. Heavy, deliberate, the kind that makes the city sound like it is thinking out loud. Marcus sat at his kitchen table and listened to it against the window and did not move for a long time. He was thinking about a woman named Cheryl Webb, his mother. A woman who had raised him in a neighborhood where size was the first language and everything else came after. Who had told him, when he was 11 years old and already large enough to frighten people who did not know him, that the world would always see the surface before it saw the person, and that this was a wound that cut in every direction, and that the only thing a man could control was which side of that wound he stood on. He had thought, for most of his adult life, that he understood what she meant. He understood now that he had only understood half of it. He had spent years being acutely aware of what it felt like to be categorized before being known. To walk into a room and feel the subtle reorganization of attention that happens when people see a man his size, his build, his complexion, and make their quiet calculations before he has spoken a single word. He knew that feeling with the intimacy of long acquaintance. He carried it the way you carry something heavy enough that you stop noticing the weight because the weight has simply become part of your posture. And yet, on a Thursday afternoon, in front of an iron gate, he had looked at Latasha Monroe, a woman in a red blazer, elegant, composed, standing in her own authority with the patient certainty of someone who had been through this particular door many times. And he had made every single calculation that he hated being made about himself. He had seen the surface. He had not looked for the person. The rain continued. He did not sleep well. The following morning, Latasha Monroe arrived at the office building in the city center where Kwon Jae-hyun maintained his legitimate corporate presence. A floor of glass and clean lines that served as the public-facing architecture of an empire whose real foundations were considerably less transparent. She arrived at 8:45, which was 15 minutes before anyone expected her, and 45 minutes before the first meeting of the day. This was not unusual. This was simply how she operated. She made coffee, she reviewed the schedule, she cross-referenced 3 documents that needed reconciliation before the Singapore call. She answered 4 emails with the efficient precision of someone who had long ago learned that the secret to managing complexity was not to be extraordinary. It was to be consistent, to show up, to do the work correctly every time, without requiring the work to thank you for it. Kim Do-yeon arrived at 9 and found everything already in order, as he always did, and felt the particular mixture of gratitude and mild inadequacy that her consistency reliably produced in people who worked alongside her. At 9:30, Kwon arrived. He moved through the office the way he moved through all spaces, without announcement, without performance, in the quiet assurance of a man who had long since stopped needing the room to adjust to him, because the room always already had. He acknowledged Do-yeon with a look, He set his phone on his desk. He picked up the day's briefing document that Latasha had prepared and read the first page standing up, which meant he was in a particular kind of focused mood, and the morning would be efficient and direct. He read to the bottom of the first page and then looked up. La. Sir? Close the door. She did. She sat across from him with a small notebook she kept for conversations that required documentation, and the pen she always had and did not need to search for, because her things were always where she put them. Kwon set the briefing document down. I've been thinking about what you said Thursday, he began. Not what you said to the guard. Not what happened at the gate. What you said. As if the conversation in his office afterward was the event that had stayed with him, rather than the incident that preceded it. Which part? She asked. That you've never needed to use my name at a door. She waited. With Kwon, waiting was often more useful than responding, because he said things in the order he meant to say them, and interrupting the sequence cost you the whole shape of what he was building. I've been considering whether that is something I should address structurally, he said. Whether there is a gap in how this office operates, in how you are recognized and protected within the environments connected to my name, that I have allowed to exist through negligence rather than intention. Latasha looked at him carefully. You're talking about formal authorization documentation? She said. Something visible. Something that precedes me when I arrive somewhere. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass wall of the office, the city moved in its ordinary morning rhythm. People at desks, the distant sound of the elevator, light coming through cloud cover in that particular flat way it has after a night of heavy rain. I appreciate that, she said finally. And I think it's worth doing. Practically speaking. She paused. But I want to say something, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it. Not as complaint, not as ingratitude. Say it. The documentation will help with the Marcuses of the world, she said. The ones who simply don't know. And that's real, and that matters. She held his gaze. But there are situations where a person can have every document, every credential, every visible marker of authorization, and still be made to feel like they have to prove something that was never in question for someone else. And no document fixes that. What fixes that is the people in the room deciding to look differently, deciding to ask before they assume. She paused again, shorter this time. I can't give you a structural solution for that one. Kwon Jae-hyun was still for several seconds. No, he said. You can't. And then, neither can I. It was, from him, an extraordinary thing to say. Not because it was a confession. Kwon did not confess. But because it was an acknowledgement, plain and undecorated, that there were categories of problem that existed beyond the reach of power. That money and reputation and the weight of a name could move many things, but not everything. That some doors had to be opened from the inside by the person standing in front of them, and that the best a person in his position could do was make sure the outside of the door was not locked against them before they even arrived. Do the documentation, Latasha said. I will. And brief the new staff properly. Do-yeon is already revising the protocol. Good. She opened her notebook. Then, the Singapore call is at 11. They'll want to discuss the secondary filing. And just like that, the conversation closed. Not because it was finished. Conversations like that one are never quite finished. They simply reach the point where everything necessary has been said, and what remains is the living of it. But because both of them understood that the space between acknowledgement and action is where most things die, and neither of them was in the business of letting things die in that space. They moved to the work. Across the city, Marcus Webb woke late, made coffee he didn't taste, and sat for a long time in front of a blank job application on his laptop screen. He had been offered a position, a different estate, smaller, a family rather than an organization, a setting that would ask less of him in every direction. Reeves had sent it over without comment, which was its own kind of comment. It was a clean slate, a new start, the kind of opportunity that arrives dressed in practicality and asks you to leave the recent past in the recent past and simply move forward. He stared at the form. He thought about Latasha Monroe's face in the moment his hand closed around her wrist. Not her expression. He had cataloged that expression many times in the last 3 days. The composure, the absence of fear, the quality of someone observing a situation they had already resolved internally. He thought, instead, about what it had cost her to hold that expression, about the discipline it represented, about the number of times in the years before that Thursday she had been required to build and maintain that discipline, because the alternative, to react, to visibly feel the injustice of the moment, would have been used against her. He had made her pay that cost. Without malice, without awareness, without even the dignity of understanding what he was doing while he was doing it. That was the part he had to carry. Not the job, not the termination, not the professional consequence, which was clean and fair and already done. The part he had to carry was the understanding that harm does not require intention to be real. That certainty, unexamined, becomes its own kind of weapon. That the question he should have asked at that gate, not who are you, but what am I assuming and why, was the question that changed everything, and he had not thought to ask it until it was already too late. He filled in the application. He submitted it. He closed the laptop. And then he sat with the discomfort of a man who has learned something true about himself. Not comfortably, not at his own pace, not in the privacy of quiet reflection, but through the blunt and public instrument of consequence, and understood that the learning, however late, however painful, was still the only thing worth doing with what remained. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city was washed clean and ordinary and indifferent, as cities always are, moving forward in its total continuity, carrying everything that had happened inside it without pausing to mark any of it, leaving that work, as it always does, entirely to the people inside it. Some of them were paying attention. Some of them were beginning to. And that, perhaps, was enough. A lot of women do not realize when they begin to lose themselves. It happens slowly. In the doubt. In the mixed signals. In the habit of explaining away what already hurts. And before they know it, they are accepting less than they deserve just to keep a connection alive. If that feels familiar, I want you to know this can change. I created something to help you see more clearly, trust yourself again, and stop settling for confusion. Today, it is available for just $9.90 instead of $67. More than 50 women have already joined, and many of them are finally seeing patterns they used to ignore. If this is your moment, you can scan the QR code on the screen, click the link in the description, or open the pinned comment. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room fully prepared, fully qualified, fully deserving, and still felt the weight of someone deciding who you were before you opened your mouth? Have you ever had the power to prove someone wrong instantly, but chose instead to let your dignity speak louder than your credentials? And when you think about Marcus, about a man who knew exactly what it felt like to be misjudged, ask yourself honestly, have you ever made the same assumption you hated having made about you? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet power of self-respect, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.